There was a teacup. Still warm, still trembling. But no one noticed. The spoon clinked once, then fell silent. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, while Amanda moved through the cabinets like I was not even there. She had her hair in a tight bun, her heels clicking sharp against the floor that my hands once scrubbed clean. She opened the hutch. My hutch. The one Jason and I bought at a yard sale when he was just 10. We painted it together under the sun. He spilled half a can of blue on the grass. We laughed for hours. Now she was reaching inside, pulling out the old china, my camellia dishes passed down from Aunt May. She held one plate up, tilted her head, made a face like it was too ugly to keep. Then she said, "These are chipped. I'll donate them." She didn't ask. She didn't even look at me. Just tossed them into a cardboard box like they were cheap plastic. Something in my chest folded then. Like fabric creased too many times in the same place. I didn't speak. I just pressed my hand to my cup. It was still warm. Still here. That night, Jason said something worse. He smiled like everything was normal and said the word slow and cheerful. "Mom, you should think of this house as your home away from home now. You're our guest here." Guest. In the house I helped him buy with every penny I had. With my knees, my shifts, my aching back. I smiled. But my heart went keet. That's when I knew. They weren't just changing the curtains. They were rewriting the walls. I finished my tea. Slowly. Silently. Then I climbed the stairs. Opened the old drawer where the papers still lived, the ones they forgot existed. The ones with my name. Still printed in ink. They thought I'd stay quiet forever. But I wasn't quiet. I was waiting. Jason was a sweet boy. At least he used to be. He used to braid my hair with tiny hands that smelled like peanut butter. Used to leave notes on the fridge spelling "I love you" with crooked letters. When his father died in '92, he was only 11. I remember him crawling into my bed that night, curling beside me like a question I couldn't answer. He never cried. Just held my hand while the wind rattled the windows and the grief rattled everything else. I raised him on night shifts and prayer. Back then, we had a 2-bedroom rental off Henderson Street. Roof leaked every spring. The heater made noises like ghosts. But it was ours in the way that survival sometimes is. I worked at the county hospital. Nurse assistant. Bedpans. Burnout. Long hours on linoleum floors and aching feet that buzzed by sundown. Still, I always made it home before Jason's bedtime. Always tucked him in. Always reminded him, "You are loved. Even if the world forgets, I won't." He never forgot that. Not then. Not when he graduated community college. Not when he started working tech support at that office downtown. Not even when he brought Amanda home for the first time. She was polite. Pretty. Hands manicured like porcelain. Eyes sharp as new pins. She called me Mrs. Boone. Not Mom. Not even Gloria. Just. Distant. Jason said she was just shy. I said nothing. I'd learned that silence can be a seatbelt in a moving car. They married quickly. Courthouse, nothing fancy. She wore beige. I baked a peach pie. And a month later, they asked if I'd consider selling the old place to help them buy something bigger. I said yes before they finished the question. Of course I did. That house wasn't much. Old walls. Faded carpet. But it was all I had. I sold it anyway. Wired the money straight to escrow. They picked the house together, 2 stories, white siding, a porch swing I never sat in. Amanda called it a blank slate. I called it theirs. And when they moved in, they asked me to come too, just until I got back on my feet, Jason said. I laughed. Baby, I'm 76. My feet don't get back. He hugged me anyway. Said it wouldn't be forever. Said it was family. So I packed my bags, folded my memories, and moved into the guest room of a house I helped them buy, but never owned alone. At first it felt warm. Amanda made tea. Left towels on the bed. Jason grilled steaks on Sundays like he used to when he was little, pretending to be the man of the house. I didn't mind the smaller room. It had a window that faced east. The sun came in soft around 6:30, and the floor still creaked in that comforting old bone kind of way. I put up a few pictures: Jason's graduation, one of me and his father by the lake, a watercolor of our first home. But slowly, the warmth went quiet. My photos disappeared from the hallway. Amanda replaced them with abstract canvases, all beige and gray like grief with good lighting. One afternoon I found my armchair in the garage covered with a sheet. She said it was for staging. The house needs to breathe, she added. So I held my breath. Another day, I caught her emptying the bookshelf. I'm decluttering, she said, stacking my cookbooks in a box labeled donate. She paused over one with faded pages and my notes in pencil. This one's falling apart, she said. I almost told her that was the one Jason learned to read from. That he spilled soup on page 42 and cried when I didn't yell. But I just nodded. Sure, I said. Let it go. Amanda smiled, thinking I meant the book. Jason didn't notice any of it. Or maybe he did and chose not to. He was always tired now. Late nights. Back-to-back meetings. He barely looked up from his phone at dinner. I still cooked. Still set 3 plates. Still smiled when Amanda said she was doing keto again and left hers untouched. Every so often, I caught her watching me with that look. The one people give you when they think you stayed too long at the party and don't know how to say it. Then came the comment. It was a Tuesday. I was wiping down the counter after dinner. Amanda walked in, phone in hand, laughing with someone on speaker. She didn't see me at first. Then she said it half joke, half sigh. She's sweet, but let's be honest. She's just visiting. This is our home now. I stood frozen, my dish towel dripping into the sink. She caught my eye, startled. Oh hi, I didn't see you. I was just kidding. I smiled. But something shifted. Not loud. Not angry. Just clear. Like a bell ringing from a steeple no one thought still worked. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the guest bed. The one with a tilted frame and a drawer that stuck when the weather got too cold. The room smelled like lavender sachets Amanda had stuffed in every corner. I missed the scent of lemon, oil and linen, the way our old home used to carry the echo of a day well lived. I stared at the ceiling, listening to Jason and Amanda laugh behind their bedroom door. Not cruel. Not mocking. Just closed. The next morning Jason asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. He kissed my forehead, called me mom, but it felt borrowed. I waited until they both left. Then I opened the hallway closet where Amanda had stashed things she didn't know how to throw away yet. There, under a box of tangled cords and half-used candles, was my recipe binder. The spine was fraying. The plastic sleeves cloudy. But my handwriting was still there, cursive that wobbled in the corners but stood proud in the middle. I sat down with it in my lap like it was a friend I hadn't seen in years. I ran my fingers along the margin, where Jason once scrawled, "More sugar next time, Mom." I didn't cry, but my throat ached. That evening, Amanda mentioned they might repaint. Something cleaner, she said. Brighter. I asked what color. Cream, maybe. And we'll cover the wallpaper in your room too, that floral print is so dated. I didn't argue. Just nodded. But later, when they were asleep, I opened the drawer beneath my bed, pushed aside socks and pulled out the brown envelope I had tucked there the day I moved in. Inside a copy of the deed. Signed. Stamped. My name still printed beside Jason's. Not as emergency contact. Not as cohabitant. Co-owner. It had been there the whole time. They just forgot. Or maybe they never cared to check. I held the paper to my chest. Felt the weight of ink of memory of the kind of ownership that cannot be repainted or boxed away. They thought I was visiting, but the walls, they still knew me. And the floorboards, they creaked in my rhythm. That house was built on bones they didn't bother to name. And when the time came when forgetting turned into erasure, I would remember everything. It started with the mailbox. One morning I walked down the drive in my robe and slippers just like I always did. Only this time there was a new label. A sleek little plaque that read, "The Boone Residence. Jason and Amanda." My name. Gone. No Miss Gloria. No and family. Just them. I stood there, holding the mail key like it might still open something. Inside the box bills and catalogs all addressed to Jason or Amanda. Even the power company had erased me. I didn't say anything that day. Just brought the mail in and placed it carefully on the counter. Amanda was on a Zoom call talking to someone about space optimization. She didn't look up. Later I noticed my rocking chair was missing. The one from the porch. Wicker frame. Green cushion faded at the edges. Jason once called it the creaky throne. I found it in the garage wedged between the recycling bin and an old suitcase. When I asked, Amanda waved it off. "We're updating the front porch vibe," she said. "Minimalist, clean." I nodded. No throne needed then. Another afternoon I came home from the pharmacy and couldn't get through the gate. They had changed the lock. Jason jogged up behind me smiling. "Oh yeah, we forgot to tell you. We upgraded the system. I'll get you a code soon." I never got the code. That night, I sat at the window in the guest room watching the porch light flicker. The wind had picked up. The trees moved like they were whispering to each other. I used to love that sound. Now it just reminded me of how alone I was inside that house. Amanda walked past my room with a glass of wine and a towel on her head. Jason followed carrying takeout bags and laughing at something she said. They didn't knock. Didn't ask if I was hungry. Didn't even glance in. The guest room door felt heavier than usual when I closed it behind me. The handle stuck. The heater groaned. A draft slipped under the window frame. I sat on the edge of the bed wrapped in an old shawl listening to the quiet hum of a house that no longer recognized me. Somewhere down the hall, Amanda's laughter rose again, sharp, certain, like the clinking of a door being closed for good. Amanda started rearranging the kitchen. First, it was the mugs. Then the spices. Then the knives I had sharpened for decades were tucked away in a drawer I could no longer find. I asked once gently, "Where did the cast iron go?" She looked over her shoulder, chopping kale on a board I didn't recognize. "Oh, that old thing, too heavy. I gave it away. We're modernizing." Modern. Funny word for erasing what works. The next week, the calendar on the fridge changed. No more birthdays in cursive pen. No Nana's doctor apt on the 12th. Now, it was a magnetic whiteboard with Amanda's neat block handwriting, Pilates meal prep, virtual meetings. I stood there one morning staring at the blankness where my life used to live. Jason walked in yawning. "Morning, Mom," he said, not even seeing what had vanished. I mumbled it back. Saturday down with my tea and sipped slow. That was the morning I realized I didn't have a seat at the table. Not really. They had given me a chair, but not a place. Later that afternoon, I went to the linen closet to grab a towel. It was locked. When I asked, Amanda said they had started organizing household access. I blinked. She smiled. Said she'd give me a fresh towel tomorrow. Tomorrow. Like charity. Like crumbs. That night, I heard them whispering through the vent. Amanda's voice tight. I don't want her walking through here whenever. It's weird. She doesn't knock. Jason didn't argue. He said, she's just set in her ways. Then quieter. It's only temporary. Only temporary. The words echoed like wind through an empty church. They had forgotten the roots. The hands that planted. The nights I stayed up when Jason was sick, cooling his fever with rags and prayer. Now I was set in my ways. Now I was inconvenient. A shadow in a house that wouldn't exist without me. The next morning, the bathroom cabinet had a lock too. Amanda said it was to avoid clutter. I didn't argue. I just stopped leaving my comb out. Stopped using my favorite towel. I shrank myself down to a drawer, a pillow, a single plate. And still they found ways to call it too much. One evening, I was folding laundry when I heard Amanda on the phone again. She was in the living room, legs tucked under her, speaking in a lowered tone. No, she doesn't have any rights here, she said, pausing between sentences. The house is under Jason's name. Trust me, there's nothing she can do. A beat of silence. Then laughter. Dry, certain. She's old school. Still thinks paper matters. I stood in the hallway, socks warm in my hand, and felt something snap quietly, like a button giving way on an old sweater. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept looking at the ceiling, thinking about the way my name looked in ink beside Jason's. The copy in my drawer. The original in a safe box at the bank downtown. The taxes I paid. The repairs I covered when Jason lost his job in 2017. The foundation crack I patched myself with sealant because hiring a contractor was too much right now. I remembered it all. But they had rewritten the story. And Amanda, she was editing the final chapter without even asking who built the first page. The next morning, Jason mentioned renovations. Maybe we open the kitchen. Knock out that wall. The wall I built with Uncle Daryl one summer while Jason rode his bike in circles out front. I didn't answer. Amanda looked up from her tablet. We're also thinking of changing the floors. Something lighter. My feet pressed into the hardwood, the same ones I mopped on hands and knees for nearly a decade. That night, I opened the envelope again. Touched the seal. Ran my finger along the edges of the deed. Still intact. Still valid. Still minne. They had boxed me into silence, into politeness, into guest towels, and lone space. But they forgot what silence can do when it holds a name. And mine. It was still on the papers. Amanda could swap curtains. Paint walls. Post smiling selfies by the fireplace. But she could not erase ink. She could not rewrite ownership. And she was about to find out. I don't need to raise my voice to raise the stakes. It was subtle at first. A delivery man rang the bell with a clipboard in hand. Contractor forms, he said. For Amanda Boone. He handed me a thick envelope. No mention of Jason. No mention of me. Amanda breezed past moments later, took the packet without a glance. We're getting estimates, she said. Thinking of refinancing, might as well renovate big. Refinancing. I didn't ask. But that night I opened my drawer again. Pulled out the documents. Read them line by line like I was studying for a test I forgot I signed up for. My name was still there. Clear, co-owner, not contingent. Jason had never changed it. Maybe from laziness. Maybe from love. Or maybe he didn't think it mattered. The next week, Amanda hosted a brunch. Friends came. Well-dressed. Loud. Too much perfume and polished words. I wasn't invited. But I was home. So I stayed in the guest room until someone knocked. A young woman, Polita. Sorry, do you have more glasses? I handed her 4 from the back of the cabinet, the ones Amanda didn't like because they had gold rims. Later that evening, I found one cracked in the sink. No one said a word. The following Monday, Jason left early for work. I was rinsing dishes when Amanda came downstairs still in her robe. She poured coffee into one of my mugs, the floral one that used to sit beside my Bible each morning. You know, she said, leaning on the counter, Jason and I have been thinking about equity. We want to put more of the house in his name just for financing purposes. I didn't blink. She kept talking. Smiling. It wouldn't change anything day to day. Just paperwork. I set the dish towel down. My name is still on that paperwork. Amanda sipped her coffee. Set it down carefully. Then shrugged. For now. She left the mug half full. Lipstick smudged along the rim. Walked upstairs like she'd just rearranged a shelf and not tried to erase a woman. I stood there for a long time. The coffee cooled. The quiet spread. She was already acting like the deed had changed. Already speaking like I was a memory, waiting to be filed away. But memory has weight. And paper, real paper, does not dissolve that easy. That night I called Mrs. Lane. She used to work in records at the same hospital I did. Sharp mind. Kept her maiden name and every receipt she ever signed. We hadn't spoken in months. But when she answered, her voice still had that firm softness. Gloria, she said. You all right? I told her the truth. Not all of it. Just enough to show I wasn't imagining things. She didn't gasp. Didn't offer pity. Just said, bring the papers. We'll take a look. The next day, I rode the bus into town. Held the manila folder on my lap like it was the last good secret I owned. Mrs. Lane met me at her porch. Sweater, glasses, yellow legal pad in hand. We sat under her crepe myrtle tree drinking warm ginger tea while she read every page. She tapped one with her pen. This is airtight, she said. Unless you signed a release, they can't alter this without your consent. I hadn't signed anything. Amanda must have been betting on ignorance. Or compliance. Or both. Mrs. Lane leaned and lowered her voice. If they try to refinance without your signature, that's mortgage fraud. I blinked. The word hit heavy. Fraud. It sounded too big for the quiet harm I'd been living in. But that's the thing with harm, it doesn't have to be loud to be real. Mrs. Lane made a copy of the deed. Wrote down names of 3 lawyers who still owed her favors. You don't have to sue, she said. Just make sure they know you can. I nodded. The folder sat heavy in my lap on the ride home. Heavier than groceries. Heavier than shame. When I stepped off the bus, Amanda's car was in the driveway. Jason's wasn't. I stood outside a moment. Listened to the wind move the trees. Inside I found Amanda at the kitchen table surrounded by brochures. Remodeling catalogs. Floor samples. She looked up surprised. You've been out. I didn't answer. Just set my purse down. Hung up my scarf. And made a pot of tea without asking. Amanda watched me carefully. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. We both knew the air had shifted. She was planning her new home. But she forgot some roots are harder to pull than they look. Later that week, Jason called a house meeting. We never had those before. He stood by the kitchen island, arms folded like he was prepping for a performance review. Amanda sat beside him, laptop, open fingernails, tapping the keys like a metronome of control. I sat opposite them. No tea. No warmth. Jason cleared his throat. So, we're thinking of moving some things around. Financially. Structurally. He glanced at Amanda, who picked up smoothly. We spoke with a consultant, she said. They recommend consolidating ownership to streamline future transactions. I said nothing. Jason shifted. It would mean adjusting the deed, he said, but just for ease, you'd still be family. Still live here. Still. The word landed hard. Like a stone in my shoe. Amanda pulled out a printed document. 1 page. Signature line at the bottom. Just here, she said. Simple release of claim. No fuss. I picked it up. Held it. The paper was thick, high quality, the kind used for wedding invites or resumes. I smiled, then set it down. I'll review it with counsel, I said quietly. Jason blinked. Amanda frowned. Is that necessary? She asked. I met her Hase. Absolutely. Silence. Long and brittle. Amanda stood. Gathered her laptop. Jason rubbed the back of his neck. I thought we could just handle this as a family. I stood too. Still calm. Family should know who they're asking to disappear. Then I walked out. Back to the guest room. The guest room in the house they wanted to call theirs. That night I didn't sleep. I organized papers. Labeled folders. Wrote dates in the margins. Mrs. Lane had said one more thing before I left her porch. If they try to force your hand, make sure you have witnesses, even quiet ones. I had just the person in mind. The next day I called Maya. Jason's daughter from before Amanda. She picked up after 2 rings. Grandma, she said, voice alert. I might need your help, I said. No hesitation. Say when. I smiled into the phone. She was her mother's child, firm, fair, and fully awake. Amanda thought I would fold. Jason thought I would fade. But I still had my name. Still had my papers. And now I had a witness. Let them keep planning. I was building something too. The worst part wasn't Amanda. It was Jason. Not what he said. But what he didn't. The silence that spilled out of him every time she tightened her grip. Every time she dismissed me, cut corners, or closed doors that used to be mine, he just stood there. Looking tired. Looking down. That kind of silence cuts deeper than any insult. One evening, he found me folding laundry again. Same room. Same ritual. He leaned on the doorframe. You okay? He asked. I folded a towel. Just doing what I always do. He hesitated. Then said, Amanda's under a lot of pressure. I know she can be. Blunt. Blunt. Like a blade. Like a hammer. Like the kind of woman who draws a blueprint over someone else's history and calls it design. I didn't respond. He crossed his arms. I just want peace in the house, Mom. No drama. Peace. They always call it peace when they want you to be quiet. I looked up. Jason, do you think I'm in the way? He paused. Not long. But long enough. Then came the shrug. Number. Of course not. It's just. This isn't forever. Right. I stared at him. At the same boy who used to beg me to stay until he fell asleep. The same boy who once built me a card table fort when I had the flu because he didn't want the germs to be alone. Now he stood there counting down my stay like a hotel clerk pretending to be kind. He saw the look in my eyes and tried to soften. I didn't mean it like that. You're always welcome. It's just. Things are different now. Different. That word again. Like I was an antique they hadn't figured out how to throw out yet. I folded the last towel. Placed it on the stack. Pressed down gently the way I used to press bandages after stitching someone back together. I won't stay where I'm not wanted. His shoulders tightened. Don't say that, Mom. But he didn't say the opposite. Didn't say I was needed. Didn't say I mattered. Just looked down at the laundry basket like it had all the answers he wasn't brave enough to say. I walked past him, down the hallway with photos that weren't mine, through the kitchen with cabinets I no longer recognized, out to the porch where my rocking chair used to be. Gone. The sun was setting. Warm light on cold siding. I sat on the steps. Let the ache move through me like fog over a quiet lake. I had known disappointment. But this was something else. This was erasure wrapped in civility. And it hurt most because it came in my son's voice. That night I stayed in my room. The air felt heavier than usual. The heater clicked on and off like it couldn't decide whether I was worth warming. I sat with the deed in my lap. The corners curled slightly from so many hands, so many nights like this. It didn't bring comfort. Not that night. Because ownership means nothing when your own child sees you as a line item to be managed. I thought about packing. About walking out, finding some senior apartment with beige walls and bingo nights and silence that didn't hurt so much. But the thought of leaving made something tighten in my chest. Not because I was afraid. Not even because I was angry. But because I remembered how hard I had fought to build a life with meaning. Not just shelter, but history. Not just rooms, but roots. And now, they wanted to prune me out of my own story. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. No television. No book. Just the hum of the fridge down the hall. The occasional creak of floorboards as Amanda moved from room to room, already making space for a version of life without me. In the morning I made breakfast. Habit maybe. Or maybe defiance. Bacon, eggs, grits with a bit of butter. Jason came down first. Stopped when he saw the table. You didn't have to. I know, I said. I sat. Ate quietly. Amanda came later. Saw the plates. Wrinkled her nose. I thought we agreed on meal prepping. I handed her a fork. Didn't say a word. She didn't eat. Later that afternoon, I heard her on the phone again. This time, whispering. No, she hasn't signed anything. Yes, I know she's still on the deed. But Jason's going to talk to her again. I stood outside the door. Unmoving. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. Not anymore. That was the moment I stopped hoping he would fix it. Stopped waiting for recognition to come through love. Love had a limit, apparently. But paper didn't. I walked to my room. Opened the bottom drawer. Pulled out a small black notebook with tabs. Inside dates, copies, names of contractors I had paid for, receipts for the foundation, repair notes from the year Jason was laid off. All of it. My proof. My story. In ink. That night I didn't cry. I drafted a letter. 1 page. Firm. Clear. I signed it in blue ink like I used to on medical charts. Strong hand. Straight line. When you lose what you thought would protect you, you have to build something sturdier. And that's what I was doing now. Not revenge. Just remembering what they wanted me to forget. The next morning, I called Mrs. Lane again. Her voice came through steady like it always did. I'm ready, I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She just said, come by after lunch. I wore my Sunday sweater. The one Jason got me before Amanda. It was soft. Still smelled faintly of cedar. I brought every paper. Every folder. The black notebook and a small envelope with the original tax receipts. Mrs. Lane was waiting on the porch with lemonade and a yellow legal pad. We sat under the same tree. The blossoms were fading, but the branches still held. She reviewed the documents with a practiced eye. Underlined a few things. Made small notes in red ink. You have more than enough, she said. Enough for what I asked. to make your position known. That afternoon, we drafted a letter addressed to Jason and Amanda, stating clearly that no action could be taken on the house without my written consent. We mailed a copy, certified. We also sent one to the refinancing company Amanda had contacted. They won't admit it, Mrs. Lane said, but they were hoping you'd never speak up. I nodded. I wasn't angry. Not in that moment. Just steady. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery near the post office. Got a slice of lemon pound cake and sat by the window. Watched people come and go. Young mothers with strollers. An old man with a dog. Teenagers laughing too loud. It reminded me that the world was still wide. That my life was bigger than the borders of that house. When I got home, Amanda was in the kitchen. She looked up, saw the bakery bag, raised an eyebrow. I smiled, tore a piece of cake and ate it slowly in front of her. No apology. No permission. Just me. Jason came home later. Amanda pulled him aside. Whispered in the hallway. Fast. Urgent. I walked upstairs. Set the rest of the cake on the little tray in my room. Saturday by the window. Watched the last of the sun slip through the blinds. That night, no one spoke to me. And for once the silence didn't sting. It felt like mine. And I had learned that peace is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of self. 3 days later, an envelope came. Jason handed it to me over morning coffee. No words. Just a flicker of something behind his eyes, maybe guilt. Maybe confusion. I took the letter. Opened it slowly. Read the heading. Refinancing application suspended due to lack of full ownership consent. Amanda walked in right then. Saw the paper in my hands. Her jaw tightened. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. I folded the letter and tucked it in my sweater pocket. Then I finished my toast. That afternoon, Maya came to visit. She hadn't been by in months. Amanda never invited her. Said the house was too full lately. But Maya texted me directly. Said I want to see you. She brought flowers. Grocery store lilies wrapped in paper that smelled like spring rain. We sat on the back steps away from the windows. She asked what was going on. I didn't give details. Not all of them. Just enough for her to see the shape of things. She nodded. Listened. Then said, whatever you need, Grandma, I've got you. She was 23 now. Sharp. Kind. Worked part-time at the library and volunteered with a housing justice group. I looked at her, really looked, and saw pieces of myself. The girl I used to be before marriage, before duty, before I learned how quiet a woman had to become just to be left alone. Maya pulled out her phone. You want me to call someone? You want backup? I laughed softly. No, baby. Not yet. But soon. I nodded. Maybe. When she left, she hugged me twice. Once for goodbye. Once for solidarity. Later, Amanda asked why she had come. I said. Because she wanted to see me. Amanda's eyes narrowed. You told her, didn't you? I told her I'm still here, I said. And I matter. She didn't answer. Just walked out the back door and let it swing hard behind her. That night, I lit a candle. One of the good ones I'd been saving. Lavender. Soft scent. All comfort. I placed it on the windowsill. Let the light dance against the glass. Amanda could pace. Jason could deflect. But the house now knew. I was not gone. Not fading. Not finished. And I had just begun to speak without raising my voice. Amanda started slamming doors. Not from rage. From fear. Jason began staying late at work. Avoided dinner. Answered in short phrases like a man halfway through a maze he had no map for. I didn't confront either of them. Instead, I cleaned the guest room. Wiped the baseboards. Polished the old drawer handle until I could see my reflection again. That night I left the kitchen light on. Just one light. One sign that said, "This house is not completely yours." The next morning Amanda said nothing. Just drank her coffee while scrolling her phone. Her fingers tapped harder than usual. Jason came in later. Saw the mail pile. Sifted through it too fast as if expecting bad news to leap out and bite him. I watched them both from the window seat. I didn't speak. Didn't move. But I was present. Present in a way they hadn't planned for. That afternoon I baked cornbread. The same recipe I'd used every winter since Jason was 7. The smell filled the hallway, buttery warm, undeniable. I heard Amanda sigh when she passed the kitchen. I heard Jason pause at the edge of the counter. I didn't say, "It's for you." I didn't say anything at all. That evening, the plate was empty. Washed. Dried. Set gently on the dish rack. No note. No thanks. Just silence with a new shape. Later I sat at my desk and opened the small box where I kept personal things: the locket from my husband, the pressed flower from my wedding day, and the first drawing Jason made in preschool. A house with 3 crooked windows and my name written under the roof. I touched the corner gently. It was smudged, but still legible. Still Mina. Then I picked up my pen and wrote one more letter. Not to Jason. Not to Amanda. To the county recorder's office. Just an inquiry. Requesting confirmation that my share of the title remained intact. I sealed the envelope carefully. Wrote my return address with a steady hand. Let them feel in control. Let them whisper behind closed doors. But I knew the truth now. They could box me out of rooms. Erase me from pictures. Even try to rewrite my role in the story. But the paperwork, it still carried my voice. And I was no longer afraid to let it speak. Has someone ever tried to push you out of something you helped build? What did you do to reclaim your space, your worth? We invite you to share your story in the comments below. Your voice might be the light someone else needs to remember they matter. 2 days after I sent the letter, the phone rang just past noon. It was Mrs. Lane. "There's been movement," she said. She sounded calm, but I could feel the current under her voice. The refinancing company flagged the application, and the recorder's office just emailed confirmation. "You're still co-owner Gloria. Fully. Legally." I nodded into the phone. She continued. "They'll have to halt everything. No lender will touch the deal until they get your signature." Which, of course, they won't get, I said. "No," she replied. "They won't." We sat in the quiet together for a few seconds more. Then she added, "You've got leverage now. Real legal leverage." That word leverage was never one I used before. But I let it settle in my chest like a brick in a cracked foundation. After the call, I brewed tea. Poured it into my old porcelain mug, the one Amanda had tried to toss months ago. I sat in the kitchen with the blinds open. Sunlight spilled across the tile, like something being returned to where it belonged. Amanda came in mid-call. She was on speakerphone, voice sharp, steps clipped. "Yes, I understand, but we need this done by May." "No, I told you the paperwork would be finalized." She glanced at me. Paused. Turned the phone face down. I sipped my tea. Looked straight ahead. She hovered. Then finally asked, "You did something, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Not out of spite. But because there are moments when silence is louder than speech. Moments when a woman who's been dismissed chooses to hold her power rather than hand it away. Jason got home later. His shoulders looked heavier. He barely made eye contact as he moved through the house. I watched him, wondering if he remembered the stories I used to tell him about the nurses at my hospital, how we worked long hours, fought for every patient, never backed down when something mattered. I wondered if he remembered that I was one of those women. Or if the years had faded me into softness so completely he forgot I was once steel under white cotton. That night, I opened my notebook again. Wrote 3 simple lines. May 3. Legal status confirmed May 4. Leverage acknowledged May 5. Begin quiet extraction. I closed it, set it beside my tea, and for the first time in weeks I slept without locking the door. The next morning, I ironed my slacks. The gray ones. Neat crease. Worn only for church and things that mattered. Amanda noticed. Going somewhere, she asked. I didn't look up. Downtown. For what? Errands. I folded a scarf into my bag. Added a copy of the deed. And the envelope from the recorder's office. Then I left the house without explaining further. I took the 9:45 bus into the center of town. The same route I used to ride when I worked at the hospital. Some things had changed. New coffee shops. A pharmacy gone. But the courthouse still stood. Tall. Unmoved. I walked up the steps slowly. Felt the weight of each moment in my knees. Inside, I met with a man named Mr. Koenig. Young. Polite. Smelled faintly of lemon and ink. He was one of the referrals from Mrs. Lane. Real estate law. Trusted. I handed him the folder. He flipped through quietly. Then looked up. This is all solid, he said. I nodded. I don't want to fight, I told him. I want clarity. He smiled at that. Most people who walk in here want drama or revenge. You're asking for dignity. I felt something catch in my throat. Not sadness. Just recognition. Yes, I said. That's exactly it. We spoke for 20 minutes. He explained how we could file a declaration of interest. How we could formally notify any financial institution that I would not release my share without terms in writing. He also said something else. You could force a buyout if you wanted. It's your right. I didn't answer right away, because I didn't want power to feel like punishment. I wanted it to feel like remembering. I'll think on that, I said. When I stepped outside, the sun was high, hot against the back of my neck. I walked slowly past the bakery, past the florist, then stopped at a bench under the dogwood tree. I sat there for a long time, watching birds pick at crumbs. Watching mothers hurry small children across crosswalks. And I thought, I don't want to leave the house in anger. But I won't stay as a ghost. When I got back home, the porch was quiet. No voices. No slamming cabinets. I walked inside, put away my scarf, and made myself tea. Jason peeked in a few minutes later. Good day, he asked. I stirred the sugar slowly. It's just beginning, I said. That weekend I received a second letter. This one from the refinance office. It confirmed termination of all pending activity until full co-owner authorization could be obtained. I read it twice, then placed it inside my folder next to the deed and the county letter. 3 sheets of paper, all quiet, all binding. Amanda found me later in the sunroom. She stood with her arms crossed, shoulders tight. I assume this is your doing, she said. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. You've created a mess, Gloria. I looked up slowly. Number, I've uncovered one. She blinked. The silence between us stretched wide. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I folded the letter. Slipped it back into my folder. Then stopped pretending I was never here. She didn't respond. just stood there with her mouth set and her eyes burning with everything she would not say out loud. She left the room without another word. I sat back in the chair, hands resting on my lap. The air felt still, but it wasn't heavy. It was clean. Later that evening, Jason came to my door. Knocked. I let him in. He sat on the edge of the bed, like a boy again, all knees and apologies. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. I looked at him. "I did. Just not in ways you were ready to hear." He saw ahead. "I didn't think it would come to this." "It always comes to this when people confuse silence with surrender." He nodded slowly. His hands fidgeted with the corner of the quilt. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided," I said. "But I know what I won't do." He looked up. "I won't be erased, Jason. Not from this house. Not from the truth of what built it." We sat together a few minutes longer. Not angry. Not reconciled. Just there. Two people finally seeing the wall between them. And the cracks that had always been there. That night I wrote one more note. This one for me. Taped it inside the closet door. "Nothing changes until you stop asking permission to exist." In the morning I opened the curtains wide. Let the light fall on every corner of the room. No hiding. No shadow. This house had always had my name on it. Now it had my voice too. The first real shift came on a Tuesday. Jason was working late again. Amanda was in the kitchen typing furiously at her laptop, sighing every few minutes as if the air itself owed her something. I stepped in. Quietly. Held a plain manila envelope in my hands. She looked up. "What's that?" "Documents," I said. "My terms." She closed her laptop slowly. "What terms?" "I'm not leaving," I said. "And I'm not invisible." Amanda laughed short, flat. "No one said you were. But you acted like I was." I placed the envelope on the table. Inside a notarized statement of interest, a formal letter addressed to Jason and to the mortgage office. And a copy of the legal notice confirming my co-ownership with the county seal in the corner. She didn't reach for it. She just stared. "You think this changes anything?" she asked. I met her eyes. "I know it does." She stood. Crossed her arms. A flicker of panic behind her control. "You'd really go through all this just to prove a point?" I shook my head. "No. To protect my dignity." She looked down. Then back up. "What do you want?" That was the question. And I had my answer ready. I want boundaries. My own set of keys. My name back on the mailbox. And no more decisions about this house without me at the table. She scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "Then file to remove me legally," I said. "And see how far you get." She didn't move. Didn't speak. Because she knew. And she had known. All along. I stepped back. Left the envelope where it was. Walked out of the kitchen without raising my voice. That night the house was quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet. Not the quiet before a storm. Just still. And in that stillness, I felt something settle in me. Not victory, but place. I belonged. Not because they said so, but because the truth finally had weight on paper and in the room. I sat by the window and watched the porch light blink on. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. The next morning, I made breakfast. Bacon. Biscuits. Fresh strawberries. I set 3 plates. Used the good silver. Amanda came downstairs first. Stopped in the doorway. I didn't look up. I just said breakfast is ready. She didn't answer. Just walked to the counter, poured her coffee, and stood there still uncertain. Jason joined a few minutes later. He looked tired. Not from sleep, but from holding too many things he could no longer ignore. He saw the table, then looked at me. "You cooked?" I nodded. He sat, carefully, like a man easing onto thin ice. Amanda remained by the counter. I didn't coax her. Didn't explain. I had made space. Whether they took it or not was up to them. Jason ate slowly, quietly. Finally, he looked up. "About the papers," he began. I waited. I didn't know how far things had gone. I thought Amanda was just talking to the bank. I didn't think they were that serious. I folded my napkin. "You didn't ask." He swallowed. "I should have." "Yes." Amanda turned around then. Her voice was clipped. "So what now? You just get your way, and everything goes back to normal." I stood, picked up my plate, carried it to the sink. "This is normal now," I said. "I won't be ignored, I won't be handled." She opened her mouth, closed it again, and for once the silence came from her. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store, had a copy of the house key made. I didn't ask. I didn't explain. I returned home, walked to the mailbox and unscrewed the plaque. The one that read Jason and Amanda Boone. I replaced it with a plain metal tag. No names. Just the number. Neutral. Honest. Shared. Amanda saw me through the window. She didn't come out. Jason was on the porch later that evening. He sat beside me without speaking for a while. Then he said, "She's not going to change." "I didn't ask her to," I replied. He looked out at the yard. At the crepe myrtle beginning to bloom. "I want to make this right." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. But I let him sit there. That was enough for now. Because sometimes, the beginning of justice is simply being seen without needing to ask for it. On Sunday, I set the table with linen napkins. The ones from my first house. Stitched by hand. A little worn at the corners, but still strong. Jason noticed first. "These are old," he said. "They've lasted," I replied. Amanda didn't comment. She just sat down and picked at her food. We ate in relative peace. No small talk. No raised voices. Only forks against china and the sound of birds outside the kitchen window. Afterward, I cleared my plate, wiped the counters, and pulled out a folder from the sideboard drawer. I placed it in the center of the table. Jason raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Transfer agreement," I said. "Drafted by Mr. Koenig." Amanda leaned in skeptical. "You're leaving?" "No," I said. "But I'm formalizing terms." Inside the folder, a proposal. I would retain 50% ownership indefinitely. Any future sale, refinance, or structural change would require my signature. In exchange, I'd allow them to remain without rent so long as they respected my place. And if that ever changed, I'd have the right to dissolve the arrangement. Legally. Quietly. Completely. Amanda read it in silence. Jason looked at me. "You're giving us a chance," he said. I nodded. "One." He glanced at her. She didn't object. That night, I sat by the window and watched them both move around the house a little more carefully. Not out of fear. Out of awareness. I saw Amanda pause before tossing a dish towel. I saw Jason fix the loose porch step I had asked about for weeks. No one said thank you. I didn't need it. Dignity doesn't wait for applause. A few days later, the new mailbox label arrived. Simple brass. 3 names this time. Jason, Amanda, Gloria. I attached it myself. The metal was cold, but the feeling it gave me was warm and firm. A kind of justice you could hold with both hands. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Lavender. The soft one. I brewed tea. Set only 1 cup. Mine. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was reclaiming anything. I had already done that. Now I was simply home. Spring came late that year. The crepe myrtle in the front yard took its time. Weeks of bare limbs before the first green whisper. I found comfort in that. Some things bloom only when they are ready. I began watering the porch plants again, not because anyone asked, just because I wanted to. The soil felt soft under my hands. Familiar. Like the rhythm of something that belonged to me before anyone thought to question it. Inside the house had grown quieter. Not cold. Just gentler. Amanda moved around me with fewer clipped steps. She still rarely spoke first. But when she did, it was measured. Neutral. Jason and I started having small conversations again. Mostly about groceries. Weather. The creaking noise near the water heater. But beneath it all, something unspoken had shifted. One morning, I caught him pausing at the edge of the hallway. He was looking at the photo wall. The one Amanda had curated, all new frames, all clean smiling faces. None of me. I said nothing. Kept folding laundry in the next room. That afternoon a new frame appeared on the shelf. Small. Wooden. And inside it a picture of me and Jason at his college graduation. I did not touch it. Did not even mention it. But when I passed it, I lingered. Not to gloat. To remember that even in erasure there are seeds that wait for the right light to grow. On Sundays, I returned to baking. Not always for them. Sometimes just for me. I made lemon bars. Apple cake. Corn muffins with rosemary. The oven warmed the kitchen in ways conversation never had. Sometimes, Amanda would take a slice and leave the plate in the sink clean. Jason often offered to do the dishes. I let him, not because I needed help, but because letting someone serve you is also a kind of healing. I still kept the folder. Still checked the mail. Still reread the paperwork once a month to remind myself that silence is not weakness. It is memory. It is spine. It is signature. Some days, I walked past the mailbox and ran my fingers across the brass plate. My name. Their names. Not a compromise. A record. One evening, I sat on the porch with my tea and the old shawl I had once folded away in fear. I watched the trees move in the breeze and I thought, this is not a victory anyone will clap for. There is no parade for quiet reclamation, but there is peace. And there is place. And for a woman like me that is enough. More than enough. Last week Maya came by. She brought a pie. Blackberry still warm, wrapped in the same kitchen towel I gave her 2 summers ago when she moved into her first apartment. I thought of you, she said, placing it gently on the counter. Because this recipe was yours first. I smiled. Let her hug me without saying a word. She stayed for tea. Saturday in the chair across from me, legs curled up like a child who still believed grown women could hold the world together with steady hands and pie crust. We talked about little things. Her classes. Her rent going up. The old neighbor with the loud dog. But somewhere in between, she looked at me and said, I'm proud of how you handled everything. I let that settle. I didn't handle it perfectly, I said. She shook her head. Number. You handled it with your name intact. That's rarer than perfect. I reached over. Touched her hand. Keep your papers, I whispered. Know where they are. And never be afraid to say I was here. Later that night after she left, I opened the bottom drawer and took out the deed one last time. Not to defend it. Not to wave it like proof. Just to feel the weight of it again. Ink on paper. But more than that, a record of standing your ground without stomping. I placed it back. Closed the drawer gently. Then I opened the window. The night air smelled of honeysuckle and old leaves. I listened. To nothing. To everything. To the sound of a house that no longer bristled when I moved through it. A house that had space for my steps and memory in its walls. And I thought, this is the kind of legacy they never show in movies. No grand speeches. No final battles. Just one woman quietly refusing to be written out. I turned off the light. Poured the last of the tea. Let the porch creak as I stepped out barefoot onto wood I helped pay for and helped protect. And I stood there, bare toes pressed against time, letting the cool air remind me. Some roots do not need applause to hold a house upright. They just need to be left in peace. The porch light hums against the dusk, and inside the oven still carries the scent of blackberry and butter. I have learned that legacy is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply your name restored to the mailbox you once paid for and were nearly erased from. What is one quiet act you've done in your life that still echoes through your walls? We'd love to hear it below. You are not alone. Your name matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.